Listeners, don't forget you don't have long. Fantasy football is back again. There is a link to our league in the description. For the fantasy, get involved, beat me, Kilo and Jack, and I hope to see you there. Enjoy the show. Listeners, welcome back. It is our Premier League previews, and it's time to look at the teams from 12th down to 17th. Those teams are Leicester, Stoke, Crystal Palace, Swansea, Burnley and Watford. And there'll be some of you sitting there now thinking, I'm not sure if this podcast's for me. Well, let me try and entice you. First of which, I'm joined by Work the Space, Jack Peachman. Jack, hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
My voice is still a wee bit raspy, but we've got to keep going with these. I've made the commitment.
We love a raspy Jack, don't we? And I'm forever joined by Callum Keane. Kino, good to have you back again.
There was no funny message at the beginning of that show. I might just put your outtake in that you just did.
No,
or
don't.
Maybe even the outtake we've just had.
Well, I mean, Kino's just received some food, everyone, for anyone that's interested. Anyway, he's intrigued by these selection of teams. Proudy, who is a member of the show, isn't here this week. But, I mean, is anyone that sad about it? I'll do a quick poll. Anyone sad about Proudy? No.
I feel like if you miss three shows in a row, then you no longer remember.
Yeah, it's like
week.
baseball. Right, then let's kick things off, shall we? Let's not waste any more time, and let's go straight to former Premier League champions. We're still going to say that while it's still relevant. Leicester City, who have had a very interesting spell in the transfer window. Of course, didn't have the greatest of years last year under Ranieri, but Craig Shakespeare came in and he wrote a beautiful story, didn't he? He got Leicester to a quarter-final in the end, Champions League? Quarter-final? Yeah, it was quarter-final, wasn't it? And has been very, very active, I dare say, in the transfer window. They've not seen too many names leave. Robert Zieler, who of course was brought in to be competition to Schmeichel, has left. But they've brought in Harry Maguire from Hull City, Vincent Abora, which me and Kino rate very highly, Jakupovic, is that you say it? Something like that, from Hull City. And the big one for me as well, Kelechi Iheanacho from Manchester City, spending around sort of £60 million on these players. What do we think then, boys? Leicester, last season, they could never quite live up to the expectation that they set themselves, Jack. No. But in fairness, they've gone out this season, especially spent some of that Champions League money, and I think they've acquired well.
Yeah, I think for Leicester, the big thing is about maintaining momentum from the end of last season. Of course, Shakespeare came in. It was kind of a temporary job at the time. He did a very good job. Vardy found some form towards the end of the season. I think he got 8 goals in the last 13 games of the season for Leicester. And I feel like that's just kind of where they need to be going into the season. They're going to hope to carry that onwards and upwards. And as you said, they've bought smartly. I feel like, defensively, they've really bolstered their team. I think if you look at their signings last year, the likes of Musa, who perhaps didn't have the greatest first season, but is still a good attacking talent. I think with the likes of Hoof and Morgan kind of aging that little bit.
You got there.
I did eventually. I feel like Leicester needed to improve there, and obviously Maguire, I think he had a quite good season at Hull, obviously fairly young English player. 17 million though is still a lot of money, but I'm excited to see Leicester this year. 2 years ago, Chelsea, they won the league and then they finished 10th. Leicester won the league and then they finished 12th. So Leicester could finish 3rd this year if they're as good as Chelsea.
Do you think in terms of acquisitions, Kino, is it almost, are some of these signings a year too late, or did they need that year? Because you look at Abora, and I think we both agree, Abora and Iheanacho, maybe not available last season. I mean, both players were quite, I would say, pivotal to either side, Sevilla or Manchester City, but they enjoyed being there. It wasn't like either of those players were looking for a move. A year's gone on, and clearly Leicester have identified the players that I think would have made them a lot better last year, I have to say.
Oh, I think they would definitely have made them better last year. I think they've had a fantastic summer in terms of in transfers. That's not the question mark for me over Leicester this season. I'm not necessarily convinced yet by Shakespeare.
Do you think they'll break the top 10?
It all depends on him for me, because he was obviously very successful after taking over from Ranieri at the end of last year, but in doing so, he didn't really have to manage as such. He reverted back to the formula that had been so successful for Leicester the previous season, obviously won them the league. And so there was almost, he was making sort of micro adjustments, and he obviously deserves a lot of credit for sort of being able to win the dressing room back after what was an awful situation for 6 months of last year. So he deserves credit. I just worry that while the players that the club have brought in, I don't know how much inputs he's had, presumably a fair bit. While the players that they brought in are good, particularly, as you say, Iheanacho and Ibarra, I just wonder whether or not in only, his 6th, 7th, 8th month of being a manager, whether he'll have sort of the the guile to really get them playing together and adapt the way they need to.
Yeah, he came in, he managed 16 games last season, won 8 of them, drew 3, lost 5, 50% win rate. I mean, for any Premier League manager, isn't too bad. Like,
no,
so, and if you can replicate that next season, it'll see them on around 50 points, you would imagine. So, and for me, that's a relatively successful season. That's slightly more than they got last season.
Yeah,
so,
I think top half for Leicester would be a good.
Yeah,
really good
I think signing Iheanacho and signing Abora, that has to be the target for Leicester fans to now become. We've talked about it in the past with the teams we've talked about in previous shows, that there has to be a jump for some of these sides to decide, you know what, we're not going to be part of this relegation fodder, this trash, I think, as I've described them before, and they're going to start to push on a little bit and eventually aim for that top 6. Jack, do you think Leicester have had enough of a reshuffle from what they've had before? Because after that season where they won it, a lot of those guys are still around. You mentioned like Morgan and Huth, they're still there, they're still playing for them. Vardy, of course, is going to be still there. Looks as if Mahrez might even still be there. And they weren't brilliant last year. They had a decent season, but they didn't pull up any trees.
Mahrez did have a bid put into him, I think, by Roma, which was rejected. I still don't think that saga's over. I know there's been talk of Danny Drinkwater going to Chelsea.
Yeah,
I would be very surprised by that.
Damari Gray as well has been subject to a lot of interest, apparently.
He's the one for me that I think there could be. I could see him making a move to maybe even a top 6 team. I think he's that good. And he hasn't played a huge amount at Leicester, so you could maybe see them letting him go.
There's a little talk that he might go to Spurs, and I think that wouldn't be a dreadful move.
I think that would be a good move for Spurs as well. As we've said, they're missing that kind of player. But yeah, that's the one that might have legs. I think Mahrez less so now.
Mahrez has said a bid was rejected. Like there was a bid, but he's not. I feel like at this point he's kind of accepted the fact. He's kind of stuck with Leicester. I think last year Leicester did well to keep hold of a few of their players, and I think it's really just gives you an idea of how bad they were last year. The fact that there was just literally no rumours of Vardy going anywhere, because you would have thought maybe a West Ham might have had a bit of a sniff around, given the rebuild that they're kind of doing, especially when it comes to strikers. I feel like, I don't know, for Leicester, I think top half finish would be a really good finish for them. But I still feel like there's business that might be done both in and out for Leicester this year. Yeah,
there's still, as we record, there's still time left in the window. Let's move on to Stoke, shall we? We'll try and keep. There's more teams to go through today, so we'll try and keep this relatively brief. Stoke are a side that have been so consistent in recent years. I think they finished 8th, sort of 3 years in a row. I think when you look back to our sort of previews last year, we would have all kind of said that, we expect them to be top half. Didn't happen this year. It was very tight at the bottom. So far, though, this summer, they've brought in Darren Fletcher. Josh Tymon's come in from Hull City, a highly rated young left-back. They've also recently brought in, I think it may well be as we record today, Choupo-Moting, that will be familiar probably to Football Manager and FIFA players, because he's that sort of guy that you would bring in, because he's quite quick, from Schalke. Do we think Mark Hughes is... obviously, we'll do this as part of our predictions, but I think Mark Hughes might be the first to be sacked this summer. I
think if they continue the form that they sustained for a lot of last year, I agree, yeah. I think, and he's kind of in that bracket of clubs where they do often turn over their managers because the expectations do differ a lot. And they've spent money this year, as you say. I know Fletcher came in on a free, brought some players in. They've let go people like Whelan to us,
well, they're outside. Could be actually more interesting. Well. We'll go through who. Shea Gilwin's left the club. Walters has gone. Whelan and Arnautovic, of course, has gone to West Ham. And Phil Bardsley's gone off to Burnley as well. We'll talk about soon. So a few of those sort of, I dare say, the sort of the Tony Pulis old guard, that Whelan, Bardsley, Walters trio especially, have been moved on. And last season, or a few seasons ago, we saw Mark Hughes try and change the style of Stoke City. Brought in Joe Allen last year as well. And before that, Shaqiri and Arnautovic came in, and he was trying, and Bojan as well. He was trying to change the way that people viewed Stoke almost, if I like. And now, with the signings he's made, it feels like another sort of consolidation season. I should mention as well, they brought in Kurt Zouma on loan, which is one that we should.
That's a good signing.
We certainly shouldn't gloss over. Well, don't you find that one to be an interesting signing in that regard? Because I think we talked about it before. I think Chelsea could do with just having Kurt Zouma around.
Yeah, I agree.
So you would suspect in getting a move, we're probably going to see some sort of Shawcross Zouma partnership throughout the season. And this big season for Kurt Zouma, because he's either going to decide to be a Chelsea player or he's going to find his career sort of being at the Stoke level. It's a very huge season for Kurt Zouma. Thoughts on Stoke, Jack? Do you think they'll probably be a mid-table? You're worried for them? You think they're a relegation candidate?
I'm not going to say a relegation candidate, but I think given the fact they finished 8th a few years in a row, I think obviously it was a a disappointing season to finish 13th. I actually can see them doing worse again this year. I think it's quite telling that last season their top goal scorer was Peter Crouch with 7 goals in the league.
Not great.
And I feel like with Arnautovic going out, there is suddenly big pressure on the likes of Shaqiri to really be the hard carry that they need in this team.
He's never really done it. Do you think there's a reason? Why has Shaqiri not really performed?
I
was just laughing at Jack calling him the hard carry.
He only scores bangers. That's Shaqiri's problem. I feel like he's a player who has explosive moments of brilliance, but equally there are games where he just doesn't have an impact whatsoever. Yeah. And actually, I know Stoke have kind of got quite a few different attacking options, but they're players who have been at the club a few years now, and I don't feel like any of them have ever looked like being a 15-goal a season kind of player.
Yeah.
And I'm just worried that goals might dry up. I think defensively they're actually in quite good shape, but it's kind of when you look beyond that.
Yeah, they've got Berahino, of course. We may well see something from Berahino more so this season. He's going to he's had a full pre-season. This might be when he didn't score for them last season. Again, there's quite a few players actually at Stoke that are in a bit of a make or break situation. I would include probably Berahino in that. I said the same thing about Kurt Zouma. Shaqiri arguably played 21 games last season, 4 goals. It's just not enough. Bojan is still there as well, is he not? So
he was injured, of course, but yeah, it's a big season for all those players.
Yeah, there's a lot of players at Stoke that've got a point to prove, and it's a bit of a sink or swim season for them. What I am hoping though, going into a World Cup, is we see the revitalised form of Jack Butland, who of course was very much injured for a long period of last season. He's only played 5 games for them last year. I really hope we see a lot more of Jack Butland, because I mean, you look at the England number ones right now. You've got 4 spread across Premier League sides, none of which are in the top 6. So you've got Forster, Hart, Pritchard, Butland, and who am I thinking of? Someone else. Pickford. Sorry, Everton, of course. So
he's the one for me. I think could really him and Butland would be.
Well, there's a shootout, isn't there? One of those keepers will not be going to the World Cup next year, and I think right now they're on a pretty much level playing field. I think Joe Hart has sort of fallen off a little bit. So,
but I think he would get in at least on his reputation and name.
Well, yeah, but you would say Everton are probably fighting on more fronts. Jordan Pickford has got a huge opportunity there.
This is Gareth Southgate.
Well, yeah, but you got to remember Southgate knows those players. He knows Butland and Pickford probably far more than he knows Joe Hart. So he may well find that he trusts them. Depends on what sort of style he wants. Pickford is also known to be a bit more of the kind of keeper that can play out from the back. Yeah. If Southgate wants to go in that direction, then I think Pickford makes more sense. Any more to say on Stoke? I feel like I said more about them than I anticipated there.
No, I think
we good.
Sorry, I think they'll either get top half comfortably or finish below 15th. I don't feel like they'll ever be in that middle ground.
Conclusive views.
I think they will be in a very similar position to where they finished last year, which would probably be enough to get Hughes sacked, whether that's mid-season or at the end of the season. I just feel as though they've kind of, particularly with players like Fletcher for Whelan, they sort of replaced like for like. I like the Zouma signing, but I don't think they have strengthened as much as other teams around them, particularly people like West Ham will be moving up and that kind of thing. So
what I think we should do for this one, because I think that sometimes these teams are, I wouldn't say put out in the cold, but there's always that focus from especially people like Sky and BT and probably ourselves actually sometimes on the podcast, the top 6. Leicester fans, the question is, what do you expect from this season? And for Stoke fans, how happy are you with Mark Hughes? What has Mark Hughes got to achieve to really stay in that job? Has he got to get into the top 10 at least?
Another one of those clubs in the mid-table where, what is achievement anymore? Because they're not going to get in Europe.
Jack, I'll give you the warning now. When it comes to the Crystal Palace question, that's going to be on you, okay? Because you've previously called them scarily good. And speaking of Palace,
I was about to say, I still think they're scarily good.
The big news coming out of Palace, of course, is that Sam Allardyce has essentially kind of retired from football, and Chairman Steve Parish...
I don't believe that.
Instead of doing international job.
Come November, he's going to be there. He's going to rip open his suit shirt. He's going to have like a Superman icon for Super Sam.
He'll be at Stoke. He'll go to Stoke.
I mean, yeah, we could all see it, can't we? We could all see it. But no, Steve Parish has appointed, a bit of a sexy appointment this, I feel like, Frank de Boer has come in, had a very... I was calling him Frank de Boer for the England job when Allardyce got it, then went to Inter Milan, and less said about that his time at Inter Milan, I think, as a manager, the better. If I can find his record...
He was in there at a difficult time, to be fair, just prior to like the sort of owners...
14 games, 5 wins, 7 defeats for Frank de Boer. Not the best. I think that's a little bit of a coup from Crystal Palace, did very well at Ajax. Has gone to Inter Milan, obviously not done so well, but now it's coming to Crystal Palace. It's going to be interesting. They've brought in Rijderweld, is that how you say it, Jack?
Correct.
We'll go with that from Ajax. And of course, Loftus-Cheek has also come in on loan for the season from Chelsea. The answer interesting as well, actually. Flamini's now left as well. We've seen Campbell go. Jonathan Benteke, that contract agreement's clearly, we could sign him for a year when Christian's there, but then you've got to leave after that. Joe Ledley was released on a free. Steve Mandanda's gone to Marseille. So a little bit of change around there. Who's going to be their keeper?
Hennessy.
That's interesting. Is he going to be? So the Mandanda experiment was literally a year experiment.
They've got Speroni as well. So I feel like they've got two fairly okay kind of
average, below average goalkeepers.
I don't know. I think Hennessy's actually been playing pretty well.
Solid.
He played for them a lot last year. He kept Mandanda out last year.
That's true. Okay, well, for Palace then, of course, last year, bit of upheaval. Obviously, didn't start the season with Sam Allardyce, came in. He did come in, didn't he? There was a sacking, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right in saying that? Pardew was there, wasn't
he? Yeah.
Yeah, Pardew came in, did awful. Did well, did awful. Classic Pardew. Then Allardyce came in, kept them up, got them in 14th. I think for a long time, actually, we thought Palace might well go down.
Well, I think it was Sam Allardyce's arguably his greatest sort of escape act achievement by getting Palace out of that, because they were... He always said, that it'd take him like 3 or 4 months to get the squad playing the way he did, and they looked really down and out at certain points, and they managed to come out of it. So, yeah, I guess it was an exciting season.
So,
Palace last year.
Jack, you've described Crystal Palace as scarily good. I think that's a quote that will go down in ForTheFans history. Their pre-season's been pretty underwhelming. Lost to
to be clear, he did describe this Palace as scarily good.
This was a Palace who was 6th in the league, I think, after 4 games of the season.
In which case, I'm
twisting that out of context.
I put it to Jack Peachford. Are Crystal Palace scarily good right now? And if not, Jack,
yes.
how good are they? So they're still scarily good.
They're not scarily
good. On the frighteningly good to scarily good scale, they're about a 4 at the moment. They're closer to frighteningly good than scarily.
Is frighteningly good better than scarily good?
I don't know. This scale doesn't matter. What I will say is I'm really looking forward to seeing Wilfried Zaha this year. Again, a great year last year. I'm kind of surprised that he didn't get a move to a top 6 club this year. I'm surprised.
Again, Spurs linked as well.
Everton maybe tempted to go in for him with Deulofeu on his way out, but they've kept hold of him. I feel like the thing with Palace is, I feel like for the last few years, you've looked at their first team and gone, that's a team that's constantly going to stay in the Premier League, and they just haven't. It's, they have, but they've never been comfortable in terms
never
of
in style. It's always been a little bit.
They've been good enough to be away from a relegation dogfight, yet somehow they have found themselves in one.
They're spluttering over the line, sort of.
Well, they shouldn't be. With players like Kabay, as you said, Benteke, they should be higher up the league than they are. Do
you think Benteke needs to have a much better year for Palace?
I think he had a good year last year.
Do you think 15's a decent year? I don't know. I feel like they might want a little bit more.
I feel like given the creative force that is Palace, it's
you can't say Zaha's this fantastic outlet which he was last year, and then come on, they've got players like Townsend who on his day can do some nice things. Kabay's there as well. It's not like Palace are devoid of creative.
They have,
players.
The creative options are there. I think the team was just struggling though for much of last season. So, and that is almost Benteke's speciality in sort of scoring goals and struggling.
Yeah, we've never really that's a good point. We've never really seen Benteke play well in a team that is playing really well.
Which is why I was excited. I was excited for him to play.
So was I. So was I about him coming to Liverpool.
Yeah, we all were. And then what happened. So season expectations, Keno, for De Boer. I mean, again, quite a sexy appointment with Frank De Boer. Do you think he's the right appointment for a team like Palace? Do you think that's the right place for him?
It's funny because I thought that many of the signings that they have made in the last sort of 18 months were kind of the right signings, and as we saw, they had to use Allardyce to bail them out of being relegated last year. And so it's difficult to say. On paper, the setup they have there now is quite progressive. You'd expect the football to be better than it has been, particularly under Allardyce. But there's a history of it not working there. So who knows? I think top 10 again would be a goal. That would be.
There's so many teams in the Premier League this year though who I feel like they're looking at the top.
Yeah,
half.
exactly.
I dare say we're talking about 6 teams right now for this episode. I think all of them should be looking at 10th and think that should be our target this season.
And that's
for some of them at a minimum, I would dare say.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say the minimum would be that for Palace, so that's part of the problem, really. There's so many teams around them. It's very difficult to call until at least, after the first sort of 10 games, where they'll be. I think we'll have a much clearer picture about, particularly De Boer, I'd say Marco Silva at Watford as well, which we'll talk about in a bit, we'll have a much clearer picture about those appointments in particular a few games in.
So far, I'll sort of ask you both on this. Do you think Palace have a better squad than, say, Leicester or Stoke? Do you think that their team is better than either of those two sides?
I think it's better than Stoke's.
But not as good as Leicester's?
No, I think if they like Leicester carry the form from last year, they will be
all right.
better than
Well, Jack, I'll ask you a slightly different question. Do you think that their squad is better than both Swansea and Burnley?
Yes.
So where they finished last season was probably about right. Because the reason I say that is because the two teams I mentioned to begin with finished above them. The two teams finished below them. And based on the strengthening, I mean, we'll come on to Swansea and Burnley in a minute. We think they're probably set to finish around between, 11th and 14th, 15th?
I don't feel like they're strengthened enough. My question for Palace fans is...
You think they'll stay up?
Yes, I do think they'll stay up, but I feel like they still need additions. When you look at it, really, only Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Riedewald are the kind of two additions that you'd say are going to be mainstays of the first team, potentially.
Yeah.
So my question for Palace fans is...
Oh, yes, go on.
Where would you like to see your team strengthened? And does your team need strengthening, in your opinion? Like, is there one area of the pitch that you feel like is a fundamental issue that needs to be sorted going into September?
Lovely question. Keno, for Swansea, you'll be offering out the question, so I'll have something prepared. And speaking of Swansea, tedious link, we'll come to them next. The big talk, we'll talk about Gylfi Sigurdsson in a moment. But so far this summer, Swansea have had, I would say, a very quiet summer, considering Clement probably needs to strengthen that squad, based on what we saw last year. The big one is Roque Mensah from Las Palmas in La Liga. He's been sort of an ever-present for Las Palmas over the last few years. Comes into Swansea, and that's really, apart from Tammy Abraham, of course, I know from Chelsea against Chelsea.
I think that's a notable one. Abraham.
Well, the notable thing for me, Keno, is that Gomes has gone out. He's not there. Marvin Emnes has gone as well. Jack Cork's gone to Burnley. Of course, we'll talk about them in a minute. Barrow's gone, one of their sort of explosive wingers, I guess you'd say. So the outs have been probably more frequent than the ins. There's not been too much.
Can I just say, Gomes going to Galatasaray has gone under the radar as a weird transfer.
Go on.
Is it?
I just don't feel like there's many French players who go to play in Turkey, especially like strikers.
I don't have a huge encyclopedic knowledge of French players.
I would have thought that Gomes would be a lot more likely to go back to France, a bit like Mandanda did, where he just really didn't make a mark.
I'd love to know how many French players are playing in the Turkish league now.
That's my question to the listeners.
Excellent. I'm sure Swansea fans, they were waiting with anticipation.
I will say he's joining a Frenchman. They've already got a Frenchman, Carol, left back.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I will say for you, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know that off the top of my head. That was research.
I bring it back. I don't think the outs from Swansea I would be that concerned with, honestly. Maybe they've lost a bit of squad depth, but if he keeps that squad together, I really like the addition of Abraham. I think that could be one of the most exciting sort of transfers this season for me. Yeah. I'm really a fan of that. And players like Barrow, Emnes, like they were squad players at best, like for Swansea and have been for the last few years. I think it was Emnes was at Blackburn on loan last year as well. He got relegated from the Championship, so I don't think it'll be big misses for them.
Yeah, and that's fair enough.
Again, similar to Spurs, I quite like the fact that Clement has tried to sort of just keep the squad together and build in terms of teamwork and team spirit.
Yeah.
You would expect from what they did last year, and he did so well to keep them up from the position that they had been in multiple times last year with the various managers that they went through. So I'm excited to see what he can do. I think that's really the question. Similar to Shakespeare in a way that both those managers were sort of fighting fires last year. And did very well in that. It's a different proposition now, particularly for Swansea, who up until last year, who were flirting with relegation, had been pretty sort of stable in the Premier League, and the fans are used to pretty good football and exciting matches. So let's see if he can bring that back. I think is the real question for Swansea.
I think it's similar to Leicester, actually, as you mentioned. It's kind of like they won 9 of their last 18 games of the season under Clement. Their previous 3 managers in the season didn't get that many wins between them in the rest of the season combined. In fact, they got 3 times less wins, which is madness.
Go on, sorry, Joe.
And I'm really interested to see how they kind of keep that going on. I feel like for some teams, you can kind of have that rallying cry towards the end of a season, that pressure of relegation looming. But sometimes, starting with the clean slate, a new season, not quite got that same, upwards momentum. You've kind of lost it a little bit over the summer.
Yeah, worth noting, Borja Baston, who was obviously quite a big outlay for Swansea, has also gone to Malaga. He's replaced Sandro, who's gone to, where did he go, boys? Everton, wasn't it? And Jordi Amat's gone as well. I do think if there's one issue for Swansea, it's if Sigurdsson leaves late in the window, then that's going to be huge upheaval, because they're probably going to get a lot of money, the money they can probably afford to go out and spend to strengthen a lot of places. I still think we might see Llorente moved on to Chelsea. I think Conte still might inquire about Llorente late doors. But defensively, for me, like we mentioned when Ashley Williams left, they never really replaced him. Right now, their centre-back options are Van der Horn, who I don't think is actually too bad, Alfie Mawson, Bartley, Fernandes. Apart from that, that's their 4 centre-backs. You're going to have to hope those guys stay fit, because their defence, for me, isn't up to much. It's Rangel or Norton at right-back. It's... help me here. It's left back wise. Martin Olsen or Stephen Kingsley, obviously the relatively youngster Stephen Kingsley. Their back line for me is not that good. I mean, it's not bad. It's just like it says more relegation battle than it does fighting for the top 10. Yeah. And I think if they maybe do lose to Gertsen, then defensively that's where they're going to have to strengthen. Still plenty of time in the window. I mean, they could obviously still bring in defenders. These first few games might make the Swansea board sit up and go, hang on a minute, we're not quite good enough at the back. And now, Kino, we come to you for your question to the Swansea fans.
Well, the question is what I sort of said in my piece there, is that how likely is it that Clement can sort of return the stability that Swansea have had? Yeah. And I think what will be different is the football. I don't think they'll see the same sort of free-flowing football that they've been used to for the last sort of 5 or 6 years. I think he's a little bit more functional than that. Be interesting to see what the fans think about that. But yeah, the question marks are over Clement.
I think starting 11-wise, they're pretty good though. I think they're not in too bad a shape. I think first 11 is solid. I think similarly to maybe some other teams in this section, beyond that, that's where they haven't got many people to come off the bench and change a game. But in terms of starting a game, I think they've got a decent team. Right, any more to say about Swansea before we move on to Burnley? No. Right then, Burnley it is, and Sean Dyche, she's still got a cough or gravelly voice. Sounds a bit like you, Jack, to be fair.
Yeah. I tried to make it more gravelly. It didn't work.
The women there, Jack, would have just fallen over. You've never sounded so butch. I enjoyed that. But no, let's go on then to Burnley. Dyche has been quite quite busy in the transfer window. Charlie Taylor is coming from Leeds. Naby's coming from West Brom. Is he relatively young? I think he's quite unknown, Naby, actually. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned him. Jonathan Walters from Stoke, Jack Cork from Swansea, and Phil Barsi from Stoke as well. On the outs, Joe Barton's gone. Oh, anyone bothered?
He's banned from football, isn't he?
How long before he got it reduced, didn't he? That little ban he got for betting on football. Do you know what? That's something that went up. Did that happen over the summer or the end of last season? That
it was during the season. It was
we didn't get to talk about. Did we? Was it during the season? How come we didn't talk? It was 29th of April.
We definitely did talk.
Yeah, we did. I was going to say because he was just awful at it, wasn't he? George Boyd has gone as well, but the big loss, of course, for Burnley is that Michael Keane has gone to Everton. And how big a blow is that to Burnley, who they didn't stay up comfortably last season. They were arguably in a relegation fight. They sort of got it done just before the fight started. They got the points on the board, so they were kind of fortunate in that regard. But how big a loss is Michael Keane, Jack? 'Cause they've not really. It's not been a straight replacement for him.
No, I think it was a big loss, but I think they've known about it for a while. He had a year left on his contract. Yeah. The fact they got £30 million from him is very good money. I'm sure it's been something that has been in the back of Sean Dyche's mind kind of throughout the second half of last season. Because I feel like for Burnley, for a large spell, they were relatively comfortable in the league. You know, it was a little bit tight at the end, perhaps, but the Keane deal is just one of those ones that I think everyone knew was going to happen. It was just a case of who was going to pay for him, how much it was going to be, and was it going to happen this season or next on the cheap? As you said, they've not really got a direct replacement for him. I don't know how you fill that void in your team. I know they've not really disclosed the transfer fees they paid, so it's difficult to know how much of that money they perhaps still have left to invest. I guess the tricky thing for Burnley is obviously it's now going to be their second season in the Premier League. They're still very much finding their feet. You're not really in a position as Burnley where you have that kind of spending power that some of the teams who we've talked about already in the show have, having been in the Premier League for the last few years. And I think it's going to be a tough season for Burnley, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of money, a lot of Burnley money has gone on their new training centre, which, I mean, it's it's good to see clubs invest the money in what is essentially the kids coming through. That's how I always seem to deem when money's spent like that. But centre back, for me, Burnley I wouldn't say they're a favourite to go down, but I do worry about them more than, say, some of the other teams in the league that were there last season.
Again, yeah, I agree. I worry for Burnley probably the most of these teams that we're going to talk about because of the obvious, for me, limit. I know Sean Dyche's done a fantastic job, but he's limited as a manager. And for Burnley to get out...
Is that fair? Is that because the players he's got, what more can he really do?
Well, okay, fine. Well, but this year, for Burnley to move away from being perennial relegation sort of fighters, they need to try. Dyche needs to adapt his management a little bit more. Their away record last season was awful. They need to be more expansive in that regard, and it's like they have to pick up enough points to be able to pull out from that bottom three, who we'll talk about in the next show. But I think there's two spots there for me which I think are almost nailed on. And so for Burnley to be away from that third one, Dyche has to adapt a bit, and particularly the signings that they made. Players like Jonathan Walters, I don't see those as him. I don't see those as being indicative of his attempts, maybe to try and adapt a little bit more.
I was going to say they're quite shocked. If Sean Dyche was going to sign some footballers, it's not that shocking that you've seen someone.
That's the first thing I thought about when
you've seen Jonathan Walters got there, Phil Barsley. They're hard. You've seen them about the hard footballers. Jack Cork's an interesting addition, though. I think
that one less so. I think he's a bit more of a.
He might flourish in the middle.
He played 30 games for Swansea last year. I'm really surprised they let him go to a rival.
Yeah, curious one. I've got a question for the Burnley fans. I feel like we need one. I guess it's a bit of a basic question, but realistically, how high the Burnley fans think they can finish? I mean, there's not a lot to build on from last season. Yeah, you said in the Premier League, job done. And I think there's probably quite a lot of people last year that said Burnley would go down. I'm sure there's plenty of people this year that think so as well. That centre-back question, I guess, can be in there as well. Is there a replacement likely to come in? Should there have been one already? Like Michael Keane to me is a massive loss. Yeah, you get 25 million, but you're probably not going to get a defender as good. And I think that's probably going to be the issue for Burnley. Right, let's move on. Final team of this Premier League preview, and it's Watford, who have been extraordinarily busy, folks. Not just in the managerial dugout, but transfers as well. Of course, Marco Silva now in charge at Watford. Jack, how long would you think it will last? I mean, just as an estimate, a year? I mean, it's not bad.
4.5 years.
4.5? Is that a genuine?
Yeah, I think it could be a long-term option for them.
4.5. I mean, Jack, can I just say thank you very much for that audio snippet you provided me with there. I think he'll
played at the end of the season when he's gone.
He'll be a long-term option.
4.5 years.
I don't know where 4.5. It's a very precise amount. I'm thinking.
You've said it now.
I'm thinking 5 months into that fifth season as well. Just to
okay. All right. Well, yeah, we'll bear that in mind. He's been busy in the transfer window, and that's what you always want to see teams down there pushing a little bit. Of course, Watford finished just on the brink of relegation, although never really looked like getting relegated. So I guess in that regard, that they were okay. They've brought in though Tom Cleverley's come in, Kiko Firmania is coming from Alaves, who we spoke about in a previous show. They had a really good year last year under the stewardship of the chap who's now in charge of Southampton's called Mauricio Pellegrino, that's right. Will Hughes is coming from Derby. Interesting, that transfer, as to why that's happened. Apparently Will Hughes was signed because
played against Will Hughes.
Derby owed Watford money for players and couldn't play it, so they got Will Hughes on the cheap and scrapped the fees from behind the scenes.
I'm really excited to see Will Hughes actually. Like he's a player.
It's about time, isn't it, in the Premier League?
I saw him play for Derby against Leeds United, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and he was bossing the midfield then. At like 18 or 19 years old.
You played against him. How was he?
Yeah. I was against him in the centre of the midfield, and we drew 1-1. It was an awful weather, really horrible game.
Oh well, shout out to Callum Keane.
Can't really say he stood out in sort of the circumstances, which didn't really learn.
Luckily, though, I think he does remember you, so that's good. They've also brought in Chalobah from Chelsea. Mario Suarez has left the team. Paredes, right back's also gone as well. Not too many other notable names in there.
The thing is with Watford, though, there is always, and this is the nature of the Pozzos, the way they run their clubs, there's always a high turnover of players. Like, regardless of the fact that they have a new manager and he's obviously signing his players, they tend to move it around quite a bit. So I don't think, whereas with many clubs you'd say that if, you'd go seeing a high turnover over the summer, you go, oh, maybe they won't bed in. With Watford, for some reason, maybe it will this year, but for some reason so far, it hasn't really seemed to affect their form as much. I think the problems for Watford last year were manager related in Matt Zari, who just didn't look bothered for half the season.
Pereira got injured as well. I really want to see what Pereira does this season. I think
he looked very good at the beginning.
There was so much talk about him before he came. I think if you've played FIFA Football Manager, you'll definitely have heard of him. He was kind of on the fringes of the Juve team, but very good at Udinese, which obviously got him that initial move to Juventus. And I'm fascinated to see how he does this season. Watford, for me, aren't going to be anywhere near the relegation zone. I think they'll be safe. We talked about the teams before, by the way. I think Watford have a better team than Palace, personally. I think they're pretty similar, but I think there's more.
I actually think they're one of the best teams in the bottom half. I think they've just.
I said the division. My God,
can you imagine?
Top 6.
No, top
Jack,
6.
you just said he'll be there 4.5 years. So
I just really like Watford's squad. I think it's got some really good players in going forward. They've got some nice striking options with Dini.
So many nationalities, Jack. Do you like how sort of multicultural
it's like the United Nations?
It's got a few great English players in there as well.
Hang on a minute. Hang on. Let me stop you there. Who are the great English players?
Will Hughes.
Right.
Tom Cleverley. I'm talking for a Premier League side. I feel like having English stars. Tom Cleverley's not that bad. Manchester United. Tom Cleverley. I'll have you know.
Keep going.
Chalobah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that.
The guy that's left Chelsea after 6 loan spells.
Troy Deeney, I'm excited to see, captaining the club.
He's a blue nose, he didn't come.
Yeah. Anyone else? Ben Watson, Jerome Sinclair.
No, Jerome Sinclair. I'm curious if they're actually playing that much more because there's a bit of a fanfare about
I'll repeat. Great English players.
I think 4 of those players will start, and I don't think there's actually that many teams in the Premier League that will have 4 English players.
All right, how many do you think will be in the World Cup squad come May?
I'm talking great for Watford.
Right, okay, there we go.
Every England player is great. That's what I'm saying.
That's what we were getting.
English player.
Jack said, sorry, kid, I don't know if you heard that. Jack just said, every English player is great. Good, thank you,
in the Premier League.
In the Premier League, lovely. But no, anyone so what? I genuinely think they'll have a good season. I just think, as Jack said, I think they've got quite a nice mix of players there. Pereira, though, as I said before, is the one for me. Is there anyone else standing out for you, Jack, that maybe isn't English?
Aurelio Gomez in goal. If he's playing, I'm worried.
Oh, you're worried?
I feel like he could be the problem child.
Like the problem child. He's about 38, isn't he? The problem child.
He is the veteran problem child, though. He knows how to be the problem child.
Yeah, he'll be 37 come the end of the season.
I mean, they've got 4 first-team goalkeepers this season, so they've got alternate options, so they'll probably be okay in that regard.
Yeah, and I think every team needs that, so I'm pleased they've got those options. Big season for Chalobah. I do want to talk about him because we talked about him a little bit in the Chelsea show. I'm so disappointed that Chelsea have sold him. Then again, this might be one of the teams where he flourishes. They've bought in Cleverley, they've bought in Chalobah and Will Hughes. So
I'd love to see Chalobah and Hughes together in the middle with maybe with Capué as well, possibly in a 3.
And then you've got to get Pereira involved in that as well. They've still got players like Zarate's there, Dini. There's options for them, but I do hope we see Chalobah really play well because I think for a long time, especially when Gerrard and Lampard were retiring, there was always going to be an English midfielder come through. Chalobah's name would always come up, and because of the limited chances he gets at Chelsea, we've never really seen it. We've seen a few promising loan spells. Some have been better than others, but this is now his time and his chance to prove that, you know what, yeah, he can be a mainstay in a good Premier League side, and this is the sort of move that he's going to get. I'm pretty sure there'll be a buyback clause in his contract. That if he plays well at Watford, I mean, Watford are set to make a massive profit on him if he plays well. 5 million is the fee.
Same with Hughes, and also same with the manager himself as well. I could see this being a very similar job that for Marco Silva, as Southampton was for Mauricio Pochettino. I could see him
replacing Wenger in a couple of years. Kino,
possibly it could be any of those sort of. I could maybe even not in the Premier League.
Well, when Pochettino I've worked it out. When Pochettino in 4.5 years, Jack,
goes to Barcelona,
just to make you happy. Now, when Pochettino goes to Atletico Madrid, we've talked about this because Simeone's going to Inter. At that point, Marco Silva goes to Spurs.
Well, but yeah, I think
and takes Chalobah with him. There you go.
And Will Hughes.
And Tom Cleverley.
And Troy Deeney about Jerome Sinclair. He wants to be in Japan too.
Anything more to say on Watford before we move on, boys? Any last?
They are Jack Peachman's choice for scarily good team of the season.
Oh my God, you can't have two. You can't have two scarily good teams.
Palace is frighteningly good this year. They're a 4 out. Well,
I look forward to hearing Jack's predictions later on. Whenever I'm going
to make a Photoshop scale we can tweet out and put teams on it.
Are we keeping the predictions quiet, or shall we announce them? During our first show,
I think we keep them quiet.
No, I think you announce them because at the end of the season you play them back.
All right, we'll let the viewers decide. Do you want us to announce our predictions now, or do you want us to leave them for the big reveal at the end of the season?
Them in the first. I think either way, we'll talk about them in the first proper show this season.
What we could do, boys, is we could talk about them amongst ourselves, but not let the viewers know, and make little references throughout the season, maybe. That could be a way of doing it.
No, because I want if I'm going to do another Chelsea shout, I want to get it in print.
Yeah, you want to be able to boast about it all season. All right, that is going to wrap it up, though. If you've enjoyed the show, do leave it a like on YouTube. If you enjoyed it on iTunes, make sure you rate the show over there. And hopefully you've been listening to our other preview shows as well. There's one more to come. It's a promotion special, so make sure you listen to that one as well. Of course, we're available on Twitter at ForTheFans Show, as well as Keno, Jack and myself also been on Twitter, so do make sure you follow us as well. And the Premier League season, boys, not too far away as this comes out. Are you excited?
Smell it.
Are you excited at this point?
Yes. Fantasy team done.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, we do have a fantasy league as well. Link in the description, so make sure you check that out.
For the fantasy.
I think you were the best of us last year, you know. Jack was leading for a long time, and then me and you fought back.
I was in the top, I think 50 or 60.
Well,
see, I have the issue.
I had a good year last year.
I have the issue with fantasy football that I just lose interest in November.
Oh yeah, well, you know, at least you'll beat Jack.
You've got to be doing well, though, Jack.
Yeah, you got. Well, no, Jack was doing well.
I was doing well last year.
Inexplicably. That is going to bring us to the end there, folks. If you've enjoyed it, as I say, like us on all the social medias, and we'll see you again. The Championship promotion preview coming soon.
Rolls off the tongue.
By that, I mean it's for the Premier League sides. Any Championship fans, I'm sorry. We'll reference you occasionally. Kino's a Villa fan. You know, Kino's a Villa fan.
What about the Yeovil preview?
Pardon?
What about the Yeovil preview? You said we were going to do a Yeovil preview.
Did I?
Like 2 episodes ago. You promised none of a preview.
Well, we love with care. From me, that's a big till next time for us for the fans. Say bye, Jack.
No one thinks of Yeovil.
So bye, Kino.
See ya.
And we'll see you again soon. Goodbye. Why did you bring that up? I don't give a shit about Yeovil.